Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to be reading some Hegel, commentary on Hegel by Robert Stern. And this is the book here. So on page 98 in the PDF, and this is the Routledge guidebook to Hegel's phenomenology. What we're going to be doing is the transition from consciousness to self-consciousness. So, having come this far, Hegel is on the threshold of moving into his discussion of self-consciousness, where the focus switches from how consciousness conceives of things in the world to how it conceives of itself qua subject. It is not entirely clear, however, how the transition from the dialectic of the object to the dialectic of the subject is supposed to come about. One reading, Pippin, Rockmore, and Stewart, this transition is to be understood in essentially Kantian terms, in that what happens after the aporia of the inverted world is that consciousness comes to accept that the essence of appearances, the origin of the unity of and order of appearances, is not some beyond or law-like generalization, but the self-conscious activity of the understanding itself. And this is from Pippin, that quote itself there. This makes the transition from object to subject easy to explain, as the object turns out to be constructed by the subject. It is natural that we should now turn from the former to the latter, and so move from consciousness to self-consciousness. The difficulty, however, is that this reading aligns Hegel's outlook closely to Kant's, a fact that Pippin happily acknowledges, where he characterizes the chapter on force. Oh my God, what happened there? As he characterizes the chapter on force as the first and foremost stage in Hegel's phenomenological justification of idealism. This makes the reading of the transition contentious, as this Kantian treatment of Hegel is not universally accepted. Stern, Bottenberg, and Westphal disagree with this. Moreover, even if it is right that Hegel's claim that at this point the understanding experiences only itself should be taken in a Kantian spirit, which on a more realist reading is highly debatable, it is hard to see that this explains the transition to self-consciousness, for as we have seen at this point, Hegel is adopting the standpoint of the we as a phenomenological observer, and not of consciousness itself. Thus, when he states that we see the understanding experience only itself, this implication would seem to be that consciousness itself does not. If this is so, then the transition from consciousness to self-consciousness cannot be explained in Kantian terms as a realization by consciousness that it somehow determines the world. A more neutral reading is possible, however, where that underpins the transition from consciousness to self-consciousness is not a shift from realism to idealism, but from theory to practice. Where in theorizing we have a detached view of the world, and so abstract from our position as subjects in the world, whereas in practical activity we act on the world and so put ourselves as subjects at the center of things. Kojève takes this interpretation, and so does Harris. And this is a quote. Thus a new journey starts here. And this is from Harris 308. The practical journey of self-consciousness that has theoretically set itself on one side. Hegel frequently contrasts theoretical and practical attitudes in these terms. Where the theoretical attitude, we have our focus on the object, while in the practical one, we subordinate the object to the subject. If we are supposed to move between these two attitudes at this point of the phenomenology, this would then explain the shift from consciousness, which, like the theoretical attitude, is object-oriented, to self-consciousness, which, like the practical attitude, is subject-orientated. It certainly seems that it is the theoretical attitude that has predominated in the force in the understanding section, and which is apparently brought to grief with the discussion of the inverted world. Hegel's characterization of the theoretical attitude in the introduction to the second part of the encyclopedia, his philosophy of nature parallels the dialectic of the phenomenology thus far and helps shed some light on it. In the theoretical approach, A, the initial factor is our withdrawing from the natural things, leaving them as they are and adjusting to them. In doing this, we start from our sense knowledge of nature. If physics were based only on perceptions, however, and perceptions were nothing but the evidence of the senses, the activity of a natural scientist would consist only in seeing, smelling, hearing, so that animals would also be physicists. In the second relation of things to us, they either require the determination of universality for us, or we transform them into something universal. The more thought predominates in ordinary perspectiveness, so much the more does the naturalness, individuality, and immediacy of things vanish away. The thoughts invade the limitless multiformity of nature. Its richness is impoverished. Its springtime dies, and there is a fading in the play of its colours. That which in nature was noisy with life falls silent in the quietude of thought. Its warm abundance, which shaped itself into 1,000 intriguing wonders, withers into arid forms and shapeless generalities, which resemble a dull northern fog. Both these determinations are opposed to both practical ones, and we also find that the theoretical approach is inwardly self-contradictory, for it appears to bring about the precise opposite of what it intends. We want to know the nature of what really is, not something which is not. But instead of leaving it alone and accepting it as it is in truth, instead of taking it as given, we make something completely different out of it. The theoretical approach begins by checking appetite. It is disinterested. It leaves things to subsist in their own way, and thus immediately displays two aspects, subject and object, the separation of which is fixed on this side and that. Our aim is rather to grasp and comprehend nature, however it makes ours, to make it ours, so that it is not something beyond or alien to us. Much as he does in the phenomenology, Hegel here portrays the theoretical attitude as a stepping back from practical engagement in the world, in a way that sets the subject to one side. As a result, the world, as the subject experiences it, is lost. Now, and is replaced by a scientific image put forward by the theorist in the search for greater objectivity. Now, this is very interesting from a phenomenological and a Heideggerian point of view. Because when you're engrossed, caught up with something, you're just so, it's like, think of, as Heidegger says in Being in Time, this worker in the workshop just hammering away. All of the tools are not separate from him. He's not stepping back and theorizing about the hammer. He's engrossed in it. The lesson of the inverted world, however, is that consciousness then comes to feel that the nature of reality is ungraspable, and an apparently insuperable separation occurs between the subject and its object. Faced with this breakdown, consciousness naturally recoils from the theoretical attitude and moves over to its opposite, the practical attitude. Here, the engagement of the subject with the object is much more direct, as the subject once again becomes a being in the world, not just a disinterested spectator of it, so that the world regains its colour once more. Thus, the transition here is what one might expect from the phenomenology as a via negativa. Having found that the scientific theorist's position has ended in incoherence by attempting to view the world in abstraction from how it appears to us as subjects within it, consciousness now sees the world as something that the subject can engage with directly through its practical relation to it, as nothing but a vehicle for its self-expression. Now, in the philosophy of nature, Hegel makes clear But the practical attitude can also be developed one-sidedly, as consciousness now seeks to master the world. Likewise, in the Phenomenology, Hegel concludes that consciousness chapter by warning that in dispensing with the two-tier view of reality, adopted by the theoretical attitude, consciousness may find that it has moved over too quickly to a subject-centered conception in which it attempts to arrive at self-consciousness, or reflected into self-consciousness of itself in its otherness. It is manifest that behind the so-called curtain, which is supposed to conceal the inner world, there is nothing to be seen unless we go behind it ourselves, as much in order that we may see, as that there may be something behind there which can be seen. But at the same time, it is evident that we cannot, without more ado, go straight away behind appearance. For this knowledge of what is the truth of appearance as ordinarily conceived and of its inner being is itself only result of a complex movement whereby the modes of consciousness, meaning, perceiving, and the understanding vanish. And it will be equally evident that the cognition of what consciousness knows and knowing itself requires a still more complex movement, the exposition of which is contained in what follows. It is this complex movement that Hegel now proceeds to set out. So let's read this again. It is manifest that behind the so-called curtain, which is supposed to conceal the inner world, there is nothing to be seen unless we go behind ourselves, as much in order that we may see, as that there may be something behind there which can be seen. But at the same time, it is evident that we cannot, without much more ado, go straight away behind appearance. For this knowledge of what is the truth of appearance as ordinarily conceived and of its inner being is itself only a result. This knowledge of its being in itself, or a complex movement whereby the modes of consciousness, meaning, perceiving, and the understanding vanish. And it will be equally evident that the cognition of what consciousness knows as knowing itself requires a still more complex movement, the exposition of which is contained in what follows. So let's go through a content summary of where we have been in sense certainty. And this is provided here by Robert Stern. Characterization of sense certainty as immediate and purely apprehensive, which is why it is initially taken by consciousness to be the richest and true knowledge. So that's 90 to 91. 90 to 94, 92 to 94. There are two elements in this knowledge, the I and the this, which it claims to know. So the subject and object. 95 to 99. Sense certainty claims to be directly acquainted with the individual this, as what is present now and here in its experience, but it cannot differentiate between individuals and these terms. 100 to 102. Nor can it differentiate between itself and other I's. 103 to 8. Nor can it differentiate between I this relation and that between other subjects and objects. 109 to 10. A summary of what this discussion has shown us, namely that the ontology and epistemology of sense certainty is inadequate. Reality is not made of bare individual thises, to which the senses alone can give us privileged access. 111 to 12. Learning the lessons of sense certainty, consciousness now moves to the standpoint of perception, which treats the object as an individual thing with universal properties. 113 to 16. But there are two ways to see the relation between the individual object and its properties, as a bundle of properties also, or as a single substance underlying its properties. 1. The former view struggles to explain what makes the properties into a unity, while the latter struggles to differentiate one propertyless substratum from another. 117 to 122. To find a way out of this difficulty, consciousness distinguishes between the object itself and how it appears to consciousness. First, by treating the object as one, but its many properties as a product of our experience, and then treating the object as an also, but its unity as a product of our experience. 121 to 22, which again is an isolation it cannot resolve. 123 to 28. 128. Consciousness now tries to see the object as unified in itself, but as a plurality in relation to other things, treating the former as essential to it and the latter as inessential. But in fact, both aspects are required to make sense of the object qua individual. So these distinctions collapse. 129. This points the way forward to the next section on the understanding, which treats the object in terms of free matter and force. 130 to 31. A summary of what this discussion shows us, which is that the universal individual relation grasped by perception remains superficial as, like sense certainty, it only operated at the sensuous level. 132 to 42. 142. Consciousness now goes beyond the purely sensuous and conceives of objects as constituted by the play of invisible forces, which unify and dissolve the individual. 143 to 48. These forces are seen as an inner realm beyond appearances. 149 to 57. These inner realm is conceived of in terms of laws that govern these forces, but the understanding struggles to give content to such laws. 158 to 60. These problems lead to the idea of the inverted world, according to which everything is the opposite to how it appears. Hegel introduces the concept of the infinite as capable of overcoming the dialectic tension he has gone through, but in a way that understanding itself cannot yet grasp. And finally, 102 to 3, Hegel makes the transition from consciousness to self-consciousness, from ways of thinking about objects and the world around us to ways of thinking about ourselves as subjects. And next time, we'll do the dialectic of the subject.